So
What was the second?
I got it was regarding the topic of eschatology.
Okay.
And so I just want to thank you for allowing me to have this discussion with you, or this disagreement rather. And so I just want to preface that it's a disagreement that I have, not so much a question for me to gain information. And so number one, the question that I have concerning eschatology, and let me preface by saying this, I'm sure that you would agree to the principle of context, audience relevance, and things like that, right? When we're analyzing immediate text, we're looking for who the audience is, and we're looking at the context, authorial intent, logical flow of thought, so on and so forth. I'm sure you'd agree with that, right?
Yeah, I think, I'm sorry, I was looking at something else while you were saying that, but from what I heard, I think I do agree with you.
You think, or you do?
Say the last part again. Let me just make sure.
Those are basic hermeneutical principles: audience relevance, context, authorial intent, genre, historical background, theological background, stuff like that.
Sure.
Right. So with that said, when we go to Matthew 24, if we're seeking to honor audience relevance, if we're seeking to honor the logical flow of thought and context, my question to you is, upon what basis do you have to posit that Jesus is going to come in our future when the time text and the time constraint limits the scope of the fulfillment of all those things from verse 1 to verse 34 to that generation?
Let's go. So let's tie two things together. Matthew 24, and are you focusing on this generation?
Yeah.
Okay. And let's do two things. Let me tie two things together, because you're going to have there's an issue that I didn't bring this up. I think it was yesterday. I didn't bring this up, but I want to bring this up also. So let's go to Matthew 24, and let's go to, I believe it's verse, is it 36? This generation?
Verse 34. And then verse 34. Then
I got an important text coming in. I'm sorry. Truly I say to you, this generation will not pass away until all these things take place. So the question is, what is the aute? What is the this stand for? What does this mean? And you take it as this mean it has to be that generation at that time.
Correct, because here's the second reason why is the Olivet Discourse. The Jesus's thought actually begins in Matthew 23, where Jesus talks about how all the bloodshed from righteous Abel to righteous Zechariah will, quote, be required at this generation. Jerusalem, Jerusalem, you who slay the prophets, behold, your house is being left unto you desolate, i.e. the temple in Jerusalem. And so, number one, we see that the judgment is local. It's not universalized, because Gentiles are not guilty of the bloodshed of Zechariah. So it's a local judgment. Number two, the focus is the desolation of the house. And number three, Jesus picks up on that in Matthew 24. And then he further explicates that. In verse 15, he tells us that he's drawing from Daniel. Then coming up to verse 34, he tells us, verse 3, it talks about the desolation of the temple. And verse 2 as well, one stone will not be left upon another. And so that when we come to verse 34, that this generation corresponds with this generation in Matthew 23. And so we know that all that bloodshed did come upon them in AD 70 at the destruction of the temple, right? And so we can't say that it's a future generation, and then we also can't say that it's a universal judgment.
Okay, so how often do we see this phrase referring to the Jews or the nation of Israel as this people of this generation? How often do we see that?
Well, I can't tell you the exact number of times, but staying in the immediate context,
but a lot, right?
We have to allow those constituent elements to come to bear upon how we define that generation.
But but Matthew refers to the Jews and others as this generation or this people, right?
Can you give me an example other than Matthew 23?
Not offhand, because if I did a word search, it would take a moment. But so you do this. We can go back and look and see that this generation, this people, this generation is used several times. Matter of fact, let me see.
And I understand that a particular word can mean something in a broader context, but we know that what something might mean in a broader context isn't what it's being used as in the immediate context. And furthermore, when we take the eschatological backdrop concerning the desolation of the temple as prophesied in the law and the prophets, I see the positing of that fulfillment in no other time save AD 70. But if we posit in AD 70, then verse 30, we have the coming of the Lord, which is included within the all these things.
So you take it as though that this generation, everything that's spoken of happened. So the Lord returned sometime within that generation.
And yes, in AD 70.
AD 70. So now remember all of the things that have to happen, that have to occur. Israel did not turn to the Messiah. All the people from the ends of the earth did not come. He did not gather all of them.
Now, I'm supposing that you're gathering that from verse 39 in Matthew 23, and I don't think that what that is referring to.
No.
Matthew 23 verse 39, where it says, I will not come until you say, blessed is he who comes in the name of the Lord.
Nope. 24, let's go 24, 29. But immediately after the tribulation of those days, the sun will be darkened and the moon will not give its light and the stars will fall. 30. And then the sign of the Son of Man will appear in the sky. Now, remember, this is the exact same thing that the disciples were told in Acts 1, that the same way you see him going up in the cloud is the same way he's coming back. Jesus making the statement, Son of Man will appear in the sky, which he did not in AD 70. Then all the tribes of the earth.
How do you know that?
Well, because no one testifies of that. Because no one testifies of that.
Yeah, there's.
Wait a second.
Josephus.
Hold on. We're not talking about Josephus, but we don't know of any Christians. Secondly, then all the tribes of the earth will mourn. Did not happen, and they will see the Son of Man.
They did mourn.
Wait a second. Who did? All the tribes of the earth.
The tribes, the 12 tribes of Israel.
Did they? Let's continue reading. And yes, they will see the Son of Man coming in the cloud of sky. The cloud of the skies with power, and he will send forth his angels and a great trumpet, and they will gather together his elect from the four winds. That just did not happen. He did not gather his elect from the four winds. He gathered his elect from the four winds. Did he win?
Yes. Yes. So what you have to understand is 1 Thessalonians chapter 4 is a recapitulation of Matthew 24, the Olivet Discourse. And we know that there's a parallelism between 1 Thessalonians chapter 4 in Matthew 24, all the relevant constituent elements are there. There's the trumpet in Matthew 24, trumpet in 1 Thessalonians 4. There's the angel in 1 Thessalonians 4, the angel in Matthew 24. There's the resurrection is implied in 24, and the resurrection that is implied is Matthew 24, the verse that we're actually looking at. And the resurrection is foretold in 1 Thessalonians 4. And so the gathering of the elect was the episynagoge, the second Exodus. Jesus is the second Moses. He was gathering those that were in Hades or Sheol unto himself, all those Old Testament worthies that were anticipating a better resurrection according to Hebrews 11.
So here's a question. The Bible tells us that in that day that the sons of Israel will mourn and they will look back on him who pierced them.
Correct.
And they will come to him. They did not do that in 70 AD. Israel did not come to the Messiah in
the remnant did.
Do what?
The remnant did.
Okay. The problem that you have is that all of these have to come together. Everything. If we go back to Daniel 9, by the way, we don't know that the remnant did. Paul tells us that when he's going to deal with them, he tells us that will be after the fullness of the Gentiles. So
and that occurred.
Hold on. The fullness of the Gentiles already occurred?
Yes.
The fullness of the Gentiles has already occurred.
Yes.
Even though Gentiles are still coming in, the fullness, the completeness of the Gentiles has already occurred.
Yes. And let me tell you why.
Okay.
In Matthew 24, verse 14, Jesus says this gospel of the kingdom will be preached in all the world, then the end will come. not the end of time, because the Bible never talks about the end of time, but the time of the end of the old Mosaic.
No, actually
age.
it does, because as we read, and I don't have time to go over here, but the video that we went over yesterday, we literally talked about how all these things he's saying, the end of time, Zechariah 12, Zechariah 14. We see that this is the very end, end of time. So wait a second. Everything has to fit. You cannot go to Romans 11 and tell me that the fullness of the Gentiles has already occurred, yet Gentiles are still coming in. Yeah, please explain.
Can I explain? Mm-hmm. So in Matthew 24, verse 14, Jesus says this gospel of the kingdom will be preached in all the world, and the end will come. It's the end of 1 Corinthians 15, the end as stated in Daniel chapter 12 and the last verse concerning the end of the age. The same end that's in view in Matthew 24, verse 3, which the apostles asked him about when would be the end of the Ionos, which is Greek, that is to say, the age. And so what you read in Colossians chapter 1, verse 6 and 7, verse 23, Romans chapter 1, verse 8, Romans chapter 10, verse 18, and Romans chapter 16, verse 25 and 26, Paul states that in that Gentile world, all the gospel has been preached, that all the earth heard, all the ktisis has heard, the creation, all the nations have heard, past tense. And so with that known world that had eschatological relevance, they heard. And so what's in view is not the entire globe. If we're staying within honoring the
okay, so let me ask you a question then.
Yeah.
So when I go to Romans 11, and he says, so all Israel will be saved, just as written, the deliverer will come. I'm sorry, let me back up. I don't want you to be ignorant, brother, so that you, not in your own estimation, be wise, that a partial hardening has happened to Israel until the fullness of the Gentiles. And you're saying the word for fullness, the fullness of the Gentiles has already happened. That makes no grammatical or actual, just regular sense. We know the fullness of the Gentiles has not happened. I'm a Gentile. There are other Gentiles that are coming in. The fullness of the Gentiles has not happened. There's no other way grammatically to look at this and come up with the arche u tau pleroma tone ethnon es alpha. There's no other way to take that other than this hardening on Israel will cease only once the fullness of the Gentiles has come in, and he's speaking about being saved. So we know all the fullness of the Gentiles has not been saved. They're still being saved.
It was the fullness of the first fruits.
That's not what it says at all. Now you're adding to the text. Tell me in this text.
No, now look, no. What's happening is you're presupposing a universal quantifier. You're assuming that it's referring to every single Gentile as that has ever been born, whom God elected for salvation. What's in view here is the first fruits, as James says to the Jews scattered abroad in the diaspora. He says he has made us a kind of his first fruits. So what was in view was the harvest time that Jesus says in Matthew 21 in the parable of the tenants.
Hold on. Let me back up. Hold on. So he's speaking of the first fruits of the Gentiles.
Yes. And
that
so
necessarily that is the opposite of, or it negates the fullness of the Gentiles, the completeness, the wholeness, all of. That's literally what the word pleroma is referring to.
Do you know where Paul is gathering these verses from? What Old Testament book and chapter he's
in many cases he's coming out of Isaiah.
Isaiah chapter 27, correct?
Not all. Some Isaiah 28.
In that chapter, he's drawn from Isaiah 27. And so the time of the fulfillment of Isaiah 27 is when their altars would be turned into chalkstone, which was AD 70 at the destruction of the temple.
No,
and read Isaiah.
Because actually in this place, he's referring to Isaiah 59.
But that it's all a logical flow. And he's tying these passages together from various chapters in the book of Isaiah.
No, again, every single thing that he's promised must happen is going to have to happen. It's going to have to happen. And if you think 70 AD is in view, you're going to have to tell me where this last week took place. By the way, where do you think this last week took place? The last 7 took place. What is that?
During the Roman Empire.
During what time frame? What time frame? What time frame?
Well, what
7 year period are you speaking of?
So it's kind of hard to answer all this in just a very snippet.
Just tell me what, just, I know we can't get too far into it, but what 7 year period did this last 7 take place? From 63 AD to 70? From what? From 67 AD to 70? Tell me. Or 67 AD to 74 AD? Tell me, what 7-year period of time?
So in the middle of that 7-year period, the sacrifice stops, correct?
In the middle of it, yes.
Yes, in the middle. So that's 3.5 years, correct?
Mm-hmm.
So it was 8066. Excuse me, 8066 or 8067. Forget exactly which month within that period. That was when the abomination of desolation was set up in the temple, which, by the way, Eusebius and Josephus records occurred when they ended up killing the high priest, and they killed many Jews in the holy place, as Jesus stated in Matthew 24, verse 15. And then from 66 AD, they placed Griscala, who was the lawless man who had taken his seat in the temple of God, proclaiming to be God. And that was when the sacrifice stopped. And so in 70, which was 3.5 years later, the temple was destroyed.
When was the agreement made in 66 AD? What agreement was made in 66 AD?
Well, again, I can't remember the exact month. I'll have to pull up my quotations that I have stored. But it happened in 66 AD that Griscala, who wasn't even of the Levitical tribe, so he didn't qualify to be high priest. And yet they made him high priest by lot. And so they ended up appointing him. He didn't even know the priesthood. They profaned the temple. They made a mockery of the priesthood.
Who made an agreement with him?
The zealots. The zealots, because there was a
wait a minute though. No, it's going to be the Roman leader or the person in.
It's not the Roman leader.
Well, so within the problem is the person of the people who are going to destroy it. That's the person they make this agreement with. We don't have that. Here's the problem. We're looking for something that can fit. There was no such agreement any point in time with Israel or any Israeli leader that was violated, that was broken off in 70 AD, or one that was made 3.5 years prior. But now let's go back to what Daniel said. He said that, and as soon as they finish shattering the people of the holy people, all these events will be completed. As for me, but I cannot understand. Now he said at that point in time, they will understand. Look what he says. For the time that the regular sacrifice is abolished, the abomination of desolation is set up. There will be 1,290 days. So now here's the question. And we can go to Zechariah. We don't have time for it, but go to Zechariah 12 and Zechariah 14. We see the end of these things happening. What comes after that? At the very end is the end, and the Lord returns. That did not happen. No one other than Josephus, who's not a Christian, is making these statements.
There's Tacitus as well.
Okay, so you're saying that Jesus returned Jesus returned in bodily form in AD 70 and did what? Like the Jehovah's Witness we answered. The same question, Jehovah's Witness. Jesus returned in 1914 and 19 other. What did he return and do? What happened in 70 AD that Jesus did that's different now?
So he came in the same. He says he talks about how he will come in the glory of his Father. How did the Father come in the Old Testament? Isaiah chapter 19, verse 1.
And Jeremiah did what in 70 AD? What happened in 70 AD?
And so what was the context? It was the besieging of a people under whom.
What happened in 70 AD? What happened? So he came back and
the shattering of the holy people. The shattering of the holy people that you're just reading. Their altars were destroyed. Their temple was destroyed. They haven't had a priesthood for almost 2,000 years. And they lost their genealogical records. That whole kingdom has been destroyed. And since then has emerged a whole Judaism that's not biblical Judaism. And so they lost that kingdom, and that kingdom was given.
What is biblical Judaism?
Biblical Judaism is Judaism that honors the Levitical sacrifices,
and that wasn't done away with. So they should still be.
That was done away with.
By who?
That was done away.
By who?
By the Lord Jesus himself.
Okay, then. So the shattering of the people, you're saying that happened then. That didn't happen then. That happened at the cross.
No, it didn't. So
the law was not nullified at the cross. The law was nullified and done away with in 70 AD.
Hebrews chapter 8, verse 13 says, that which has been made obsolete is waxing old and ready to vanish away. Present tense, a present continuous. And so you have, although made obsolete, it was in process of vanishing away. Because let me ask you this question. How did Jesus fulfill the law and the prophets at the cross?
Did he? Yes.
Okay, so the law and the prophets foretold feast time, foretold Sukkot, and it foretold harvest time, of which they were anticipating. And so how was the law that commanded those types and shadows fulfilled when harvest time, according to a futurist paradigm, hasn't occurred yet?
Because he's not fulfilling all of the different feasts. What he's doing is fulfilling what the law dictated, which was atonement. That's why he makes that statement, and that's why Paul makes a statement in Romans 10 that he is the end, the completion of it. There is no more of the law to do with that. It's been nullified. It's been replaced. And at his return, when he returned, he's not returning for he's returning to get his people back, as the Bible says. That part, how do you miss that? So he returned in 70 AD, and nobody went. Nobody knew it. Josephus and Tacitus.
And I can quote other people as well.
Not a lot. Not a lot. As a matter of fact, the overwhelming majority of the church rejects that notion. The overwhelming majority of the people at that time. Someone, and I'm not a big follower of all of the church fathers. I'm not. But they didn't think that. Polycarp didn't think that. Justin Martin didn't think that. No, they didn't think that. Nobody.
But here's the thing: they also thought other things that many Protestants reject.
You're absolutely right. But Polycarp was around in 70. Polycarp was around. Polycarp was around. Some of these people were around. Clement was around. They don't speak about this. They don't. So here comes Jesus. Here comes Jesus in this seminal moment, and virtually nobody knows it. Nobody.
And again, that's a what? That's an argument from silence.
No. It's an argument from, it's a loud silence. If we're supposed to know it, the people will see it, the people declare it, and no one but a few people, the overwhelming majority of the church doesn't. Now I'm fine with that.
Are you sola scriptura or no?
I'm literally using scriptures. You just told me.
Are you not exceeding the text like you say others shouldn't?
Here's what the text says. The text says that Israel will be saved after the fullness of the Gentiles. Exegete this particular text. You added something extra. So exegete this text for me. Can you see it on the screen?
So now we want to move from the immediate context, right?
It's all talking about the same thing. So you said that you told me that Israel did mourned and placed their faith in Christ.
Correct.
That's what you told me. But Paul says otherwise, who, by the way, lived before 70 AD.
This was before 70 AD, though.
Again, Paul says the fullness of the Gentiles, once that ends, then this hardness of Israel's heart will go away. You say that happened in 70 AD. So now I say, according to this text here in Romans 11, that could not have happened. You can't tell me that the fullness of the Gentiles has already happened when Gentiles are still literally coming in. That makes absolutely no sense.
So here's where it's ignoring audience relevance. For example, Luke chapter 2 verse 1 says,
No. Stay right here in Romans, because we can't get past this part.
I need to make a point because I think you're violating a very key principle. And in Luke chapter 2 verse 1 says, in the days of Caesar Augustus, all the world was taxed. Now, do we really think that the Chinese, the Africans,
no, we know he's speaking relatively speaking, that was under their control.
Yes, correct. So then context defines what world means there in that.
What's the context of Romans?
It has to be, it's in keeping with the eschatological backdrop concerning the law and the prophets and the Gentiles that would come in and the remnant of Israel that would come in.
Okay, so what is Paul's issue in Romans?
First century, not us in the 21st century. We're picking up someone else's mail saying it applies to us. What
is Paul's issue in the context of this? And the audience is is Greek and Jew in Romans. What is Paul's issues in? What is his issue in Romans as he's speaking? What is his point? What's his issue? What's his problem?
He's speaking about He's warning that Gentiles shouldn't become proud because they were
from 9, 10, and 11. What's Paul has a specific theme.
Salvation of Israel.
Okay, because the Gentiles are being saved, right?
Gentiles in 21st century, or are you talking about?
No. Then at that time, he sees Gentiles are being saved, but the Jews aren't. Now, some are, not all, but for the most part, the overwhelming majority of salvation that's occurring now at that time is Gentile. And he says, has God forgotten this? Have they fallen so as to stumble? I'm sorry,
because it was to the Jew first and the Gentile.
Okay, but Paul's issue is the Jews, by and large, are not coming to Christ. Well, what gives? Have they not heard the gospel? Have they not heard this? Well, sure. Now he references Isaiah a lot. Isaiah is the one who speaks about them having their eyes blinded, ears dulled, hearts hardened for particular reasons, so they won't believe. When the time comes and he doesn't, if we read Isaiah, once that time happens, they will believe, and he comes back and keeps his people at that time.
And when we read in Isaiah 27,
Paul is literally bringing this up in context. He says, speaking to these Gentiles who are believers, I don't want you to be uninformed. And he says, so that you will not be wise in your own estimation about what? That a partial hardening has happened to Israel. And he tells us a time frame until the fullness of the Gentiles. What does until the fullness of the Gentiles mean? It's honestly, and I'm not being funny, it's not a difficult grammatical text to exegete. He will do this. They will be hardened until the fullness of the Gentiles. That there's no way to take this to mean that it's happened in 70 AD when there's still Gentiles coming in. And he's not even by the way, even if you want to take it for that particular locale and area, there were Gentiles coming to faith in that area after that. 70 AD, you had a lot of Gentiles coming in.
But once again, you're presupposing its application to an audience to whom it wasn't addressing. As I mentioned again about the principle that I mentioned in Luke chapter 2, verse 1, how do we define earth there in that context? Obviously, he's not talking about the entire globe. So the context is defining the application or the definition of the word earth. Similarly, in Romans chapter 11, which we have to go all the way from Romans 1 to fully understand, which obviously time will fail us to do so, to understand that the application of Israel's salvation was relevant to the first century.
But Greg,
and that's again.
Greg, hold on. Grammatically speaking, going back to this text, because again, it's not the pleroma of what? The fullness of who?
The Gentiles.
Okay, which Gentiles? All the Gentiles? Or just
the Gentiles in that known world that were alive.
Even still, now that's bad exegesis. But even still, let's go with that.
Bad exegesis.
Well, let's go with that because that's not what he's saying. But let's go with that. Let's go with that. Even at that time, even in 70 AD, we didn't have the fullness of the Gentiles. There were still Gentiles at that time in that known world at that time that were coming in after 70 AD. That's the problem with your argument. 70 AD, we see an increase in Gentiles coming, don't we? 70 AD, 80 AD, we still see Gentiles coming, don't we?
But
so
see,
even at that time in that world, we still see people who are Gentiles coming.
But you gotta understand that there was a particular quantity that was in view, as stated in the book of Revelation.
What's the quantity?
Well, let me make a point. Is even with respect to the Jews, there was 12,000 of this tribe, 12,000 of this tribe, which I don't take it to mean actual, literally 12,000, but it's just speaking of perfect numbers, the perfect quality of that remnant. And now I want to say this as well. When we going back to Matthew 24, because we have to provide a coherent interpretation. We have to satisfy both internal consistency and external coherence. And so when we look in Matthew 24 and we look at the time text and the restrictions, how do you postulate a salvation of Israel where the second coming is placed within the lifetime of that generation? And according to Matthew chapter 16, verse 26 through 27 through 28, within the lifetime of some of those apostles.
Okay.
He says, some of you standing here will not taste death until you see the Son of Man. Mm-hmm. Matthew 10, verse 23, you won't finish going through the towns of Israel until the Son of Man comes. And then we can also look in, Revelation and all these imminent time statements. One other thing I want to point out, in 2 Thessalonians, Paul says, he says, 2 Thessalonians chapter 1, verse 5 and following, he says to the Thessalonians, he said that and referring to the Jews who are troubling you, and the Greek word there is thlipsis, which is tribulation. Mm-hmm. He says they are troubling you, and God will repay with them tribulation, and they will be destroyed when the Lord Jesus is revealed, and who will bring upon them everlasting destruction. And so he says he will give you relief at his coming. So now if Jesus didn't come, then Paul made a false promise, because he didn't say they would be given relief when they die. He says they will be given relief at his coming. So if Jesus didn't come, I would say this in the words of Bertrand Russell, that Jesus failed. C.S. Lewis even pointed out Matthew 24, verse 34, and he says it's one of the most embarrassing verses in the Bible, because according to him, he said Jesus didn't know anything more than we do.
Well, the fact of the matter is, this is why Matthew is constantly referring to this generation, not at a chronological generation, but referring to it. So we go back and look at how often this generation is used, referring to Israel. He's just speaking of the people. But now, here's where C.S. Lewis is wrong. His Hebrew and Greek is wrong. This does not refer, it's a demonstrative. It doesn't refer to time. It refers to a kind. That's what this refers to. It can be like this cup. It doesn't necessarily mean this cup, but this kind of cup. That's literally how it's posited. And again, when he comes back, the people will mourn. All of Israel will mourn. Here's the problem with what you said. All of Israel will mourn and look on him whom they have pierced, right? You're saying for that generation they did. You said according to Josephus and Tacitus and one or two other people. Because if that's the case, it's true. Fine. What does the Bible say will happen when they do that? They will be filled with the Spirit, and God promises that not only will they believe, but also will their children and their children's children and their children's children. Are you going to tell me that the Jews after 70 AD, their children and their children's children believe? If that's the case, then God is wrong in Deuteronomy 30. That did not happen. 70 AD is just what happened to the temple, but that was it. That was it, my friend.
No. You don't get to say that was just it.
I do get to say that's it.
Here's the reason why. So you don't get to say that with justification.
But I did.
What I'm
did all of Israel
saying it without justification?
Did all of Israel come to Christ?
There was much more than just the destruction of the temple.
No. What was the promise of God to do in Israel, though? Once this is fulfilled, did God not promise that Israel and their children's children would also follow? To love the Lord God with all your heart, and your children's children and their descendants after them. Is that a promise? Yes or no?
The destruction of the temple and the destruction
hold on.
of holy people.
When Israel is saved, did God promise that all of Israel and their children's children and their descendants after them will love the Lord God with all their heart? Is that a promise from God?
So first of all, I don't know what passage you're referring to.
Deuteronomy 30 and 6.
Okay, so I would have to go and look at that.
How about I just put it on the screen? Let me find it. Let me put it on the screen. Let's put it right here. Moreover, the Lord your God, can you see that? Moreover, the Lord your God will circumcise your heart and your heart of your descendants, to love the Lord your God with all your heart and with all your soul, so that you may live. The Lord your God will inflict all these curses.
Now, can you define the your descendants? Who's the your there?
Israel.
Okay,
it's Israel.
So right. So now keep reading. I want to see the rest.
The Lord your God will inflict
Israel's descendants.
Once he does this,
okay.
The Lord your God will inflict all these curses on your enemies and on all those who hate you, who persecute you, which didn't happen. And you shall again obey the Lord and observe all his commandments.
That's false. It did happen.
Okay.
So Luke chapter 21, verse 20 through 24 says,
no. Again, when God
fulfill all that has been written.
So did the descendants of Israel follow after the Lord? Were they saved?
Yes. And now, so we have to define, first of all, we have to define Israel, then we have to define the descendants.
Whoever you define as Israel, did all Israel, whoever you define
is Israel.
Whoever you define as Israel, whoever is the true Israel, did all of their descendants and their descendants after them follow after the Lord?
Yes.
No,
yes. Okay. I'm telling you, yes. Right. I don't know why you don't understand.
So here's what we'll do. We're gonna have to disagree to disagree because I've got to run. I'm getting tired. I've been tired. But no, they absolutely not. You believe that he came back in 70 AD? It was the biggest nothing burger. If that was the case, because nothing happened that we can look to. The world didn't change. Hold on, the world didn't change. Israel didn't get their land. They didn't live in peace. So all of these things happened, but no one knew it except for Josephus, who's not a believer, and Tacitus. Okay.
So if I can make one more point, please.
Go ahead.
I thank you for being very respectful.
Oh, no problem. We're having fun. We're having fun, bro.
I really do.
We're having fun. We're having fun. This is just two guys going back and forth.
Israel, you said, number one, Israel didn't get the land. According to Hebrews chapter 11, it says, if they were mindful of the land of which they left, they would have had occasion to go back to it. But Abraham sought for a better land, and it says he did not receive the promises. So evidently, the focal point isn't that actual geographical patch of land. That was
yes, it is.
Shadow.
Well, wait a second.
Here's my second point. I'm
gonna give you a second point. But isn't the promise that the Lord will come and reign on that land, over that land, like Zechariah also says, he will come and reign over that land. They will be in the land, and they will have peace in that land forever.
Correct. Now, here's the thing.
Waiting.
According to Hebrews chapter 12, verse 22 through 24, it states that we are from the Jerusalem above. Revelation chapter 21, verse 1 through 3. 2 Corinthians chapter 5, verse 17, there's a new creation. That was a type and a shadow. That was pointing to a better reality. All those things, the temple, the ethnic people, the land, the physical circumcision, that was all the, quote, flesh. Okay. Now, God is seeking for true worshipers that will worship in the spirit, which is, it's an invisible kingdom. Similar, like you would say, you're in the kingdom today, but where is this king you speak of? You can't point me to a particular land or gates or an actual temple in a material, literal sense. But yet, where is the actual, either figurative or literal sense that Israel is at peace? Because he promised because Christ himself is our peace. He made peace.
He said he promised that while they're being punished, that they will even. He even named one of the participants of those who will afflict Israel, Gaza. They said whether literal or figurative. We see that still happening now. As a matter of fact, he says they will put down the bow to pick up the plowshare. They will be at peace from all their enemies on all sides. Whether figurative or literal, that has not happened. That has not happened. And so, brother, last point I wanted to make, you said you would give it to me. Go ahead.
So Matthew, so when you said it was just the destruction of the temple, so going back to that, what I prefaced by asking you, if we're going to honor context and audience relevance. Okay, when Jesus said in Matthew 24, verse 15, then when you see the abomination that causes desolation standing in the holy place, what would have that first century audience understood, save the temple and the holy place therein? And so we have
who's the you he's talking to?
Fulfillment.
You said we're going to talk about the audience. Who's the you that Jesus was talking to?
Jesus was talking about the church.
No, who's the you he's talking to?
The apostles
you said that.
There.
Okay, now did any of those people that Jesus, it was only 4 that he was talking to, did any of them see that?
Yes, they did.
Who?
The apostle. In fact, if you read Eusebius,
no. He was only talking to 4 people at that time in Matthew 24.
But they taught the church.
No. He's saying you're the one that said the immediate audience. He says you. Who's the you he's referring to in Matthew 24?
The apostles.
Who's he talking to? There was only 4 there they were talking to.
I'm presuming it was Peter, James, and John, and I don't know the other one.
Okay, which ones were dead?
Well, before 70 AD. Well, we know that John was alive because he wrote the book of Revelation in 8066 or 8067.
Wow. So you're gonna wow. Now you do realize, like, we can't go into the danger of you giving a late writing to John's writing.
I gave an early writing.
You said, okay, so he wrote, so he gave an early writing, and then so he wrote John, or he wrote Revelation before 70 AD.
Correct.
Okay.
And there's internal evidence and external evidence. Revelation 11 says that the temple would be measured. How are they measuring what was already destroyed? And then there's external quotes that I can provide that many in the first, second century posited in early dating. Thirdly,
we only
their
have one
enemies-
person, and we have one person, others repeating after, but then we have the overwhelming majority that say that say clearly the overwhelming majority of witness gives the writing of John in Revelation a late writing.
Can you name 3 scholars?
No, I'm not, because I don't want to go there now, because we're going to be here for another, because it's what time is it? It's 7:30. But here's the point, though, because I want to get off of that. The issue is, though, is you're saying Jesus returned bodily in AD 70, that the 70 weeks.
You're saying.
Hold on, wait a
You're
second.
saying that
the
bodily.
70 weeks occurred in 66 AD.
It was. It began the last week. The last half of that last week began in 66 AD and was consummated in AD 70.
Okay. And then you said that the fullness of the Gentiles had occurred, because he was only speaking of the Gentiles in that day or in that region, even though after that more and more Gentiles came. But those Gentiles that came after 70 AD, for some reason, they didn't count. They're not part of the fullness. I'm going off what you said. So there are a lot of holes, and I don't have. I can't. I won't go more into it, because I'm just tired. I've been here for, what is it? I said I promised I wouldn't be here for 3 hours. I said 2 hours, and that's it. But here it is, 3.5 hours, which is fine. So, brother, listen, we can revisit this another day. But right now, I've got to get off. But I would say this. For anyone else, I'll go ahead and let you go, so I can go ahead and get them out. But anyway, listen, Greg, thank you for being here. We'll keep this discussion going. For everyone